The dust hung thick in the afternoon air of Custer, Montana territory. When Quinton Oakes first saw the woman standing on the auction block outside Harley's trading post, her eyes hollow but defiant despite the chains around her wrists. It was late summer in 1878, and Quinton had ridden into town with nothing more than the intention of selling his cattle and restocking supplies, before heading back to his ranch, 15 miles north. He had not expected to witness what amounted to human bondage in broad daylight, though such things still happened in the rougher territories, where law enforcement was sparse, and morality often took a backseat to profit. The woman on the platform looked to be in her early 20s, with dark auburn hair that fell in tangled waves past her shoulders and green eyes that swept across the gathering crowd with something between fear and fury. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt-stained and threadbare, but she stood straight-backed as if daring anyone to see her as defeated. $50 for the woman, a grizzled prospector called out, and Quinton felt his jaw tighten. The trader, a heavy-set man with yellowed teeth and a stained vest, nodded eagerly. $50, do I hear 60? She's got years of work left in her, and she can cook, clean, whatever else you might need. The implication in his voice made Quinton's stomach turn. He had seen too much ugliness in his 30 years, fought in battles that still haunted his dreams, and lost people he loved to senseless violence. But there was something about the sight of this woman being sold like livestock that struck a chord deep within him. Maybe it was the way she refused to bow her head, or maybe it was simply that he knew what it felt like to be trapped with no way out. Whatever the reason, he found himself stepping forward before he could think better of it. $200, Quinton said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Every head turned toward him, including the woman's. Her eyes locked with his, searching, questioning, trying to understand what new hell awaited her with this stranger. The trader's face split into a wide grin. 200, now that's more like it. Do I hear 250? Silence fell over the gathering. The prospector spat into the dirt and walked away muttering. No one else had that kind of money to throw around, and certainly not for a woman who looked like she might stab a man in his sleep given half a chance. Sold to the cowboy for $200. The trader banged his gavel against the wooden post. Come collect your property, mister. Quinton walked up to the platform, every step measured and deliberate. The woman watched him approach with narrowed eyes, her body tensing as if preparing for a fight. Up close, he could see the bruises on her arms, the cut on her lower lip that had recently healed, and the way her hands trembled slightly despite her brave front. The trader handed him a rope attached to the chains. She's all yours. Name's Rose, or at least that's what she told me. Got her in a trade 3 weeks back. She's got a mouth on her, fair warning, but nothing a firm hand can't fix. Quinton took the rope but immediately let it fall to the ground. He pulled out his wallet, counted out $200 in bills that represented most of his cattle earnings, and handed them over. The trader snatched the money eagerly, counted it twice, then tipped his hat and disappeared into the trading post. Rose stood frozen on the platform, staring at the rope lying in the dust. Quinton pulled out a small key ring from his pocket, the universal keys he kept for various padlocks around his ranch, and stepped closer. I'm going to unlock those chains, he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Then you're free to go wherever you want. There's a church at the end of this street. The pastor's wife is a good woman named Martha. She'll help you get on your feet. Rose's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her defensive armor. What's the catch? No catch. Nobody spends $200 without wanting something in return. Quinton began working on the lock around her wrists. I've got a ranch north of here. I do all right for myself. That money will hurt for a while, but I'll make it back. What I can't stomach is watching someone be sold like cattle and doing nothing about it." The lock clicked open and the chains fell away. Rose rubbed her wrists, red and raw from the metal. She looked at him with such intensity that Quinton felt exposed, as if she could see right through to his core. "Who are you?" she asked. "Quinton Oakes. Most people call me Quinn." "Why did you really do this? Men don't just throw away money out of goodness. What do you want from me?" He met her gaze steadily. "I want you to have a choice. That's all. Take it or don't, but at least it's yours to make." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The street around them continued its bustle, people going about their business. But in that small space on the platform, time seemed suspended. Then Rose stepped down, her legs slightly unsteady as if she hadn't quite believed she would ever walk freely again. "The church," you said. "End of the street, white building with the cross." She nodded slowly, then turned to walk away. Quinton watched her go, something in his chest both heavy and light at the same time. He had done what he set out to do. She was free. That should have been enough. But then Rose stopped after about 10 paces. She stood there for a moment, her back to him, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. When she turned around, her expression was different, softer somehow, but still guarded. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said, the admission clearly costing her. "The church is kind, but they can't feed another mouth for long, and I have no family, no money, nothing." She paused, swallowing hard. "If your offer was genuine, if you truly have no expectations beyond work, I can earn my keep. I'm a good cook, I can mend clothes, tend animals, whatever you need. I'll work off that $200 and then some." Quinton considered her carefully. He had not planned on this, had not wanted to put her in a position where she felt indebted to him. But he also understood pride, understood the need to feel useful rather than pitied. And if he was honest with himself, the ranch could use help. He had been managing alone since his foreman left 6 months ago, and the work was endless. "All right," he said finally. "But let's be clear. You're not working off a debt. I'm hiring you as help around the ranch, same as I would anyone else. You'll get room and board and wages. Fair wages. You save that money, and when you decide you want to move on, you'll have something to start with. Why are you doing this? Maybe I'm just tired of seeing people get crushed by a world that doesn't care. Maybe I think everyone deserves a chance." He picked up the fallen rope and tossed it into a nearby trash barrel. "Or maybe I'm just a fool. Time will tell." A hint of something that might have been a smile touched the corners of Rose's mouth. "Probably a fool," she said, but there was no malice in it. "Probably," Quinton agreed. "I need to finish my business in town, get supplies loaded. There's a general store across the street. You'll need proper clothes, boots, a coat for when winter comes. Get what you need and put it on my account. Then meet me back here in an hour." Rose shook her head. "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity. You can't work a ranch in a torn dress. Consider it a uniform. Every job has one." She studied him again with those piercing green eyes, trying to puzzle him out. Finally, she gave a short nod and headed toward the general store. Quinton watched her go, wondering what exactly he had just gotten himself into. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Quinton arranged for his supplies to be loaded onto his wagon, paid his accounts, and checked in with the local telegraph office to send word to a potential buyer in Billings about next season's cattle. His mind, however, kept drifting back to Rose, wondering if she would actually return or if she would take his offer of clothes and supplies and disappear. He wouldn't blame her if she did. But when he returned to the meeting spot, she was there, wearing a simple brown skirt, a cream-colored blouse, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to keep off the sun. She had cleaned up, washed the dirt from her face and hands, and pulled her hair back into a practical braid. The transformation was striking. Without the grime and chains, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but also stronger somehow, as if the new clothes had given her back a piece of her dignity. "Ready?" Quinton asked, climbing up onto the wagon seat. Rose nodded and climbed up beside him, settling onto the bench with her hands folded in her lap. As Quinton guided the horses out of town, heading north on the dusty road that would take them to his ranch, neither of them spoke. The silence was not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who did not yet know what to say to each other. The landscape stretched out around them, vast and open under the enormous Montana sky. Rolling hills covered in prairie grass, scattered stands of cottonwood trees, and in the distance, the mountains rising like ancient sentinels. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and Quinton never grew tired of it. "How long have you had the ranch?" Rose asked finally, breaking the silence. "4 years. Bought it with money I saved from working cattle drives and some inheritance from my father. It's not much, about 300 acres, but it's mine. I run about 200 head of cattle, some horses, chickens, a few pigs. Enough to make a living. You run it all yourself, mostly. I had a foreman for a while, older man named Charlie, but he decided to head back east to be with his daughter. Can't blame him. This life isn't for everyone." Rose was quiet for a moment. "And you think it might be for me?" "I think you'll figure that out for yourself. No pressure either way." She turned to look at him, really look at him, taking in his weathered face, the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the strong hands holding the reins with easy confidence. "You're different from most men I've met. Can't say if that's good or bad. Neither can I yet." They reached the ranch as the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The main house was a solid structure built from logs, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Nearby stood a barn, a chicken coop, a small bunkhouse, and various other outbuildings. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, lined with willows and cottonwoods. It was not grand, but it was well maintained and had a feeling of permanence, of home. Quinton pulled the wagon up near the house and climbed down. Rose followed, her eyes taking in everything with the careful assessment of someone who had learned to always be aware of her surroundings. "Bunkhouse is over there," Quinton said, pointing to a small building near the barn. "It's got a wood stove, bed, basic furnishings. You'll have privacy. Main house is mine, but you're welcome to use the kitchen whenever you need. Usually I cook my own meals, but if you'd rather cook for both of us and eat together, that's fine too. Whatever makes you comfortable." "I'll cook," Rose said. "Easier to make one meal than two, and I told you I'd earn my keep." "All right then. Let me show you around, then we'll get you settled." He gave her a tour of the property as the light faded, showing her where everything was, introducing her to the animals, explaining the daily routines. Rose listened carefully, asking practical questions, her mind clearly already working through how everything functioned. She had a quick intelligence that Quinton appreciated, and despite her ordeal, she did not shy away from the work ahead. That night, after Rose had settled into the bunkhouse and Quinton had retreated to the main house, he sat on his porch watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. He thought about the choice he had made, about the woman now sleeping in his bunkhouse, and about what the future might hold. He had acted on impulse, something he rarely did, and he was not entirely sure what had driven him. Compassion, yes, but something else too, something he could not quite name. In the bunkhouse, Rose lay awake on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. She had not expected kindness, had learned long ago not to trust it when it appeared. Men always wanted something, always had an angle, But Quinton seemed different, and that scared her almost as much as the alternative. She had been traded twice in the past year, passed from one cruel situation to another, and had nearly given up hope of ever escaping. Now here she was, free in all but the chains of circumstance, working for a man who asked nothing beyond honest work. She did not know what to make of him, this quiet cowboy with sad eyes and gentle hands. But she knew she was grateful, even if she was not ready to say it out loud yet. And she knew that for the first time in a very long time, she felt safe enough to close her eyes and sleep without fear of what the night might bring. The days fell into a rhythm. Rose proved to be everything she had claimed and more. She cooked hearty meals that reminded Quinton of his mother's kitchen, mended his worn shirts and socks, kept the house cleaner than it had been in years, and even helped with the animals when needed. She worked from dawn until dusk, often longer, and never complained. But it was more than her work ethic that began to change things. It was the small moments in between. The way she would hum softly while cooking, old songs that Quinton did not recognize but found comforting. The way she would argue with him about the best way to treat a sick calf, her stubbornness matching his own until they found a compromise. The way she laughed, rare at first but growing more frequent, a sound like water over stones, clear and bright. 2 weeks into her stay, Quinton came back from checking the fence line to find Rose sitting on the porch steps, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. He dismounted quickly, worry tightening his chest. "Rose, what happened?" She looked up and he saw tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "I just realized," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "that I'm happy. I can't remember the last time I was happy, and it just hit me all at once. I'm sorry, I know this must seem foolish." Quinton sat down beside her on the step, leaving a respectful distance between them. "It's not foolish, it's human. You saved my life, you know," Rose said, wiping at her tears. "Not just by buying my freedom, but by treating me like a person. Do you know how long it had been since someone spoke to me with respect? Since someone asked my opinion on things? Since I felt like more than just property to be used? You were never property. What they did was wrong. But it happened. And it could have kept happening, or worse, until I was dead or completely broken. You stopped that." She turned to face him fully. "Why? You still haven't really told me why." Quinton was quiet for a long moment, watching the way the afternoon light caught in her auburn hair. "My mother was a strong woman," he said finally. "Came west with my father when it was even rougher than it is now. She faced down outlaws, survived harsh winters, lost 2 children before they were old enough to walk, but she never lost her kindness. She always said that the measure of a person was what they did when they had the power to walk away. I walked away from a lot of things in my life, Rose. I fought in the war, saw things that still wake me up at night. I let people down when they needed me. I guess I was tired of walking away." "The war," Rose repeated softly. "Which side?" "Union. I was young, barely 18, thought I was going to be a hero. Learned pretty quick that war doesn't have heroes, just survivors and ghosts. I'm sorry. Don't be. It made me who I am, for better or worse." He stood up, brushing dust from his pants. "I need to wash up before dinner. Whatever you're cooking smells good." Rose watched him walk toward the pump, his shoulders broad and strong but carrying an invisible weight she was beginning to understand. She had seen him wake from nightmares too, had heard him pacing on his porch in the deep hours of the night. They were both haunted, she realized, both carrying scars that did not show. Maybe that was why he had seen her on that platform and recognized something of himself. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, the relationship between them deepened in ways neither had anticipated. It was in the way Quinton would bring Rose wildflowers he found while riding the range, awkwardly presenting them as if they were nothing special. It was in the way Rose would sit with him in the evenings, mending clothes while he carved small wooden figures, and they would talk about everything and nothing. They shared stories of their pasts, painful and beautiful in equal measure. Rose told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her father's death when she was 16, about her mother remarrying a man who saw Rose as a burden, about running away and making her way west, thinking she could find work and freedom, only to be cheated, robbed, and eventually traded like goods. Quinton told her about his childhood on a small farm in Ohio, about losing his mother to illness when he was 15, about his father drinking himself to death 2 years later, about the war and the friends he had lost, about the battles that stained his memory, about coming west to escape those ghosts and finding that some demons followed no matter how far you ran. "But it's better here," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Quieter, inside my head, I mean. The land has a way of putting things in perspective." "I'm starting to understand that," Rose said. She had put down her mending and was simply enjoying the cool evening air. "I used to think freedom meant being in a city, having choices, going where I wanted. But there's something about this place, about the space and the silence, that feels more free than anything I experienced back east." "You thinking of staying then?" Quinton tried to keep his voice casual, but his heart beat a little faster waiting for her answer. "I don't know. I'm still figuring things out, but I'm not in a hurry to leave if that's what you're worried about." "I'd miss you if you left," he admitted quietly. "Place feels more like a home with you here." Rose turned to look at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. In the fading light, his profile was strong and handsome, though she had not let herself think of him that way before. It felt dangerous to acknowledge the attraction growing in her, the way her breath caught when he smiled, the way she found excuses to be near him. She had learned to distrust her feelings, to see them as weaknesses that could be exploited. But Quinton had never tried to exploit anything, had never pushed, never demanded, never taken advantage. He had kept his word in every way, treating her as an employee, a friend, but never anything improper. "I'd miss you too," she said, and the admission felt like jumping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying. Their eyes met and held, and something shifted between them, something that had been building for weeks but neither had dared to name. Quinton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. Rose's fingers curled around his, her pulse racing. "Rose," he began, then seemed to lose his words. "Yes, I need to tell you something, and I need you to know there's no pressure attached to it. You can tell me no, or you can just ignore it and nothing changes between us. You'll still have a place here, still have your job and your freedom. I need you to believe that first." "I believe you," Rose said, though her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "I'm falling in love with you," Quinton said, the words tumbling out like he had been holding them back too long. "Maybe I started falling that first day in Custer, or maybe it happened slower, over all these weeks watching you become yourself again. But either way, it's true. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. You've made this place feel alive in a way it never did before. And I know you might not feel the same, and that's all right, but I couldn't keep pretending I didn't feel this way." Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not sad tears. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared because I feel it too and I don't trust it. Every time I've trusted a man, it ended badly. Every time I let myself feel something, it was used against me. How do I know this is different? How do I know you won't change?" Quinton squeezed her hand gently. "You don't, I guess. I can't prove the future to you. All I can do is keep being who I am day after day and hope that's enough. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, Rose. I'm just being honest about where my heart is." They sat in silence for a while, hands still intertwined, watching the stars emerge. Finally, Rose spoke, her voice soft but certain. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, but I don't want to run from it either. Can we take it slow? Can we see where this goes without rushing?" "Slow as you need," Quinton promised. "I've got all the time in the world." From that night forward, things were different between them, but true to his word, Quinton never pushed. They continued their routines, but now there were lingering glances, gentle touches, moments of connection that grew more frequent. He would brush a strand of hair from her face. She would rest a hand on his shoulder as she poured his coffee. They would sit closer on the porch in the evenings until eventually Rose found herself leaning against him, his arm around her shoulders, both of them content in the simple comfort of proximity. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with bitter winds and heavy snow. The work became harder, more focused on survival than anything else. Quinton taught Rose how to handle a rifle, not just for hunting but for protection, though from what exactly he did not specify. They worked together to winterize the buildings, to ensure the animals had adequate shelter, to stock supplies that would last until spring. One night in December, a blizzard hit with such ferocity that Quinton insisted Rose move into the main house rather than risk the trip to the bunkhouse. She took the spare bedroom, small but warm, and that night as the wind howled like a living thing and snow piled against the windows, she felt safer than she had in years. In the morning, the world was transformed, buried under 3 feet of snow, and more still falling. They were snowed in completely, cut off from town or neighbors, alone in a white wilderness. It should have been frightening, but instead it felt like existing in a separate world, one where nothing mattered except the fire in the hearth and the company they kept. "Good thing you're stuck with someone who can cook," Rose said as she made breakfast, her breath visible in the cold air until the stove warmed the kitchen properly. "Good thing you're stuck with someone who knows how to keep a fire going," Quinton countered, feeding more wood into the stove. They fell into an even closer routine during those snowbound days. Mornings were spent taking care of the animals, digging paths through the snow, ensuring everything was secure. Afternoons were for indoor chores, cooking, mending, maintaining tools and equipment. Evenings they spent by the fire, reading from Quinton's small collection of books, playing cards, talking about everything under the sun. It was during one of those evenings, with the fire crackling and the world buried in white silence outside, that Rose finally let down the last of her walls. They were sitting close on the worn sofa, sharing a blanket against the chill, and Quinton was telling her a story about his childhood, something funny involving a stolen pie and a very angry neighbor. Rose was laughing, really laughing, when suddenly she turned and kissed him. It was brief, almost chaste, but it felt like everything. When she pulled back, her cheeks flushed. Quinton's eyes were wide with surprise and something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "I love you," Rose said, the words feeling both natural and momentous. "I fought it, told myself it was too soon, that I was confusing gratitude with affection. But it's not that. You're kind and patient and strong, but it's more than that. You see me, really see me, not as something to use or save, but as a person. You make me want to be brave again. You make me want to trust again. I love you, Quinton Oakes." He cupped her face gently with his calloused hands, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Rose Anderson," he said, using her full name for the first time in weeks, making it sound like poetry. "I love you too, more than I knew I could love anyone. You've brought light into a life I didn't realize was dim. You've made me believe that maybe I deserve something good, that maybe we both do." He kissed her then, slowly and tenderly, a kiss that held all the promises of tomorrow and all the healing of yesterday. It was not their first kiss, but it was the first as two people who had declared themselves, who had chosen each other freely and completely. The blizzard lasted 3 days, and by the time it cleared, something had fundamentally changed. They had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back, nor did either of them want to. Rose did not return to the bunkhouse. Instead, she stayed in the main house, in the spare bedroom still, because despite their feelings, both of them wanted to do this right, to build something lasting on a foundation of respect. As winter slowly gave way to the first hints of spring, Quinton began to think seriously about the future. He had never imagined getting married, had resigned himself to a solitary life, but Rose had changed everything. He wanted her to stay not as an employee or even just as the woman he loved, but as his partner in all things, as his wife. But the proposal felt weighted with complications. How could he ask her to marry him without her wondering if he saw it as the final transaction, the ultimate way to own what he had bought? How could he make her understand that he wanted her choice, freely given, with no sense of obligation or debt? He agonized over it for weeks, trying to find the right words, the right moment. Meanwhile, Rose was dealing with her own internal struggle. She had been thinking about marriage too, had let herself imagine a life as Quinton's wife, but she was terrified that if she brought it up, he might think she expected it, that she saw it as payment for what he had done. She wanted him to want her for herself, not because he felt responsible for her. They danced around each other, both in love, both wanting the same thing, but both too afraid to speak first. It created a strange tension, not unpleasant but charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. Finally, on a clear day in early March, Quinton decided he could not wait any longer. He rode into Custer, left Rose with a vague explanation about needing supplies, and went straight to the small jewelry shop run by a German immigrant named Klaus. "I need a ring," Quinton said without preamble. "For a proposal," Klaus, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a knowing smile, nodded slowly. "Ah, the young woman who has been living at your ranch. I had wondered when you would come. News travels. Always does in small towns. Let me show you what I have." The selection was limited, but one ring caught Quinton's eye immediately. It was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small diamond, delicate but durable. It looked like something Rose would wear, elegant without being ostentatious. "That one," he said. "Good choice. This is a ring for a woman who values substance over show. I think you know her well." Klaus wrapped it carefully. "May I give you some advice as an old man who has been married for 40 years, please? When you ask her, speak from your heart, but also speak practically. Women like romance, yes, but they also like to know that you have thought things through, that you are offering a real partnership, not just pretty words. Tell her why you want to marry her, but also tell her what your life together will look like. Give her both the dream and the reality." Quinton nodded, taking the advice to heart. He paid for the ring, tucked it safely in his pocket, and rode back to the ranch with his heart pounding and his mind racing through 1,000 different scenarios. Rose was in the garden when he returned, turning over the soil for spring planting. She looked up as he approached, shading her eyes against the sun, and smiled in a way that made his decision feel absolutely right. "You were gone a while," she said. "Get everything you needed?" "Not yet. There's one more thing I need to do." He dismounted, tied his horse, and walked over to her. "Can you spare a minute?" "Of course." She brushed dirt from her hands, curious about the intensity in his expression. Quinton took a deep breath, then decided to abandon all the speeches he had prepared and just speak from his heart. "Rose, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen all the way through before you respond. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes wide. "When I saw you in Custer 7 months ago, I thought I was doing a good deed, helping someone in need. I didn't expect you to come work for me, and I certainly didn't expect to fall in love with you. But I did, and now I can't imagine my life without you in it. These past months have been the best of my life. You've made this ranch into a real home. You've made me want to be better, to build something lasting." He paused, pulling the small box from his pocket. "I know our beginning was unconventional. I know you might wonder if I'm asking this because I feel obligated or because I think of you as something I acquired. But that's not it. You are free, Rose. You always have been, from the moment those chains fell off. You could leave tomorrow and I would never stop you, never try to hold you back. But I'm hoping you'll choose to stay, not as my employee, not even just as the woman I love, but as my wife." He opened the box, revealing the ring, and continued. "I'm asking you to marry me, Rose Anderson. I'm asking you to build a life with me, to be my partner in every sense of the word. I'm promising you respect, honesty, and love for as long as I live. I'm promising you a say in every decision, ownership of half of everything I have, and a future where you never have to doubt your value or your freedom. But I'm also promising you the reality of this life. It's hard work and long days, cold winters and uncertain summers, isolation and struggle. I can't offer you luxury or ease. What I can offer is my whole heart and a life built on something real." He knelt down on one knee in the dirt, looking up at her with such open vulnerability that Rose felt her eyes fill with tears. "Will you marry me?" Rose stared at him, at this man who had changed everything, who had given her back her life and then offered to share his own. She thought about the girl she had been, terrified and hopeless on that auction block, and the woman she was now, strong and loved and free. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, all the pain and loss, and how it had led to this perfect, impossible moment. "Yes," she said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Quinton stood, slipping the ring onto her finger, and then pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as she cried happy tears into his shoulder. "I thought you were being charitable," Rose said through her tears. "When you bought me, when you gave me a job, when you were so patient with me. I thought you were just a good man doing good deeds. But this proposing, this means you see me as your equal, as someone you choose, not someone you save." "You were never a charity case," Quinton said firmly. "You were a woman who deserved better than what the world had given you. And you are my equal, Rose. In every way that matters, you're stronger than I am. You've survived things that would have broken most people. I'm the lucky one here. I'm the one who gets to spend my life with someone extraordinary." They stood in the garden, holding each other as the sun climbed higher, and the world seemed to glow with possibility. Eventually, they went inside, spent the rest of the day planning and dreaming, talking about when they would marry and what their life would look like. They decided on a simple ceremony in May, when the wildflowers were blooming and the weather was mild. They would marry in Custer, with the pastor officiating and whatever townsfolk wanted to attend. Then they would return to the ranch and begin their life as husband and wife. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy and joyful. Rose sewed her own wedding dress, a simple but lovely creation in cream-colored silk that she ordered from a catalog. Quinton cleaned and painted the main house, making it shine. They worked together on the ranch, making improvements and planning for the future, talking about maybe expanding the cattle operation, about children they hope to have someday, about growing old together. The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, clear and warm with a gentle breeze. Rose wore her handmade dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers Quinton had picked at dawn. Quinton wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed, and boots polished until they shone. The ceremony was held in the small church, with Martha, the pastor's wife, serving as witness along with several townsfolk who had heard about the wedding and wanted to attend. When the pastor asked Rose if she took Quinton to be her husband, she looked into his eyes and said, "I do," with such conviction that there was not a doubt in anyone's mind about the strength of her commitment. When Quinton said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, a man who knew exactly what he was promising and meant every word. They were pronounced husband and wife, and when they kissed, the small church erupted in applause. As they walked back down the aisle hand in hand, Rose caught sight of the trading post through the church window, the place where her new life had begun, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for all the winding roads that had led her to this moment. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, held at the church hall with food the townswomen had prepared and music from a fiddle player who knew every old tune. Rose danced with her husband, amazed that she could use that word, that this strong, kind man was hers and she was his. They stayed until late afternoon, then rode back to the ranch in Quinton's wagon, newly decorated with wildflowers and white ribbons. That night, alone in their home, they came together as husband and wife, and it was tender and passionate and right. Rose had been afraid, carrying the trauma of past violations, but Quinton was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. Afterward, lying in his arms, she felt a profound sense of peace, as if all the broken pieces of her had finally been made whole. Their married life fell into a comfortable rhythm. They worked side by side during the day, building their ranch and their future. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, talking and planning, sometimes in comfortable silence, just enjoying being together. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Rose proved to have a head for business, keeping meticulous records and suggesting improvements that increased their efficiency. Quinton deferred to her judgment on many things, and their true partnership flourished. By late summer, Rose realized she was pregnant. She told Quinton one evening after dinner simply and directly and watched joy bloom across his face. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Rose asked, needing to hear it. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified too, if I'm being honest, but mostly just grateful. Another gift I didn't think I'd ever have. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Rose continued working on the ranch as long as she was able, only slowing down in the final months. Quinton hovered and worried, which Rose found endearing even as she teased him about it. They prepared the spare bedroom as a nursery, painting it yellow and building a cradle from smooth pine wood. In early March, as snow still dusted the ground but the first hints of spring warmed the air, Rose went into labor. Quinton rode hard to fetch the midwife from town, and by the time they returned, Rose was well into her contractions, gripping the bedpost and breathing through the pain. The midwife, an experienced woman named Sarah, took charge immediately, and Quinton found himself relegated to the role of nervous father-to-be, pacing and praying and feeling utterly helpless. After what felt like an eternity but was actually about 8 hours, a baby's cry pierced the air. Quinton rushed into the bedroom to find Rose exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "It's a boy," she said, smiling through tears. "We have a son." Quinton knelt beside the bed, looking down at the tiny face, red and scrunched and absolutely perfect. "He's beautiful," he whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names, but now, holding their son, Rose knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," she said, "after your father, Thomas Quinton Oakes." "Thomas," Quinton repeated, the name of a man he had loved and lost, now reborn in this new life. I think that's perfect. Fatherhood transformed Quinton in unexpected ways. He was gentle and devoted, helping with the baby at all hours, changing diapers and walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy. Rose watched him with their son and fell even more deeply in love, seeing this strong cowboy reduced to mush by a tiny baby's grip. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. They expanded gradually, adding more cattle, buying adjoining land when it became available. Rose proved to be an excellent mother, finding ways to work and care for Thomas simultaneously, often carrying him in a sling as she went about her tasks. Quinton built him a small swing on the porch, and Thomas would squeal with delight as his father pushed him gently back and forth. When Thomas was 2, Rose discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with calm joy, the confidence of parents who had done this before and knew what to expect. Their daughter was born on a warm summer day, an easier labor than the first, and she came into the world with eyes already open, alert and curious. They named her Alina after Rose's mother, and she quickly revealed herself to be her brother's opposite in temperament, calm where he was energetic, thoughtful where he was impulsive. The years passed in a blur of busy contentment. Thomas and Alina grew healthy and strong, helping around the ranch as soon as they were old enough. The family became a fixture in Custer, known for their hard work and integrity. Quinton and Rose's marriage deepened with time, growing stronger rather than stale, built on genuine partnership and enduring love. When Thomas was 7 and Alina was 5, Rose convinced Quinton to hire help so they could finally take a trip, something they had never done. They left the children with Martha, who was delighted to spoil them, and took a week to travel into the mountains, camping under the stars and exploring territory they had never seen. One night, sitting by their campfire, Rose turned to Quinton. "Did you ever imagine that day in Custer, that this is where we'd end up?" Quinton thought about it, looking at his wife in the firelight, still beautiful, maybe more so now than she had been then, made radiant by happiness and confidence. "I don't think I let myself imagine anything beyond getting you free, but if I had, I don't think I could have imagined anything this good. You've given me everything, Rose. A family, a real home, a reason to wake up grateful every morning." "We gave that to each other," Rose corrected gently. "You gave me my life back first, but then we built this together. Equal partners, just like you promised." "Equal partners," Quinton agreed, taking her hand. "Always." They watched the fire burn down together, comfortable in the silence, secure in the love they had built from the most unlikely of beginnings. Years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a strong, responsible young man, taking on more of the ranch work as Quinton aged. Alina revealed a sharp mind and a way with numbers, taking over the business side of the operation and increasing their profits through smart decisions and careful investments. The ranch that had once been modest grew into one of the more successful operations in the territory. On their 20th anniversary, Quinton took Rose back to Custer, to the spot where they had first met. The trading post was gone, torn down years earlier and replaced with a proper general store. But Quinton could still see exactly where the auction block had been, could still remember the exact moment their eyes had met. 20 years, Rose said, standing beside him, her hand in his. They were both graying now, their hands rougher and their faces lined with time, but their love had not diminished. If anything, it had grown richer, deeper, seasoned by shared experience and mutual respect. 20 years since you changed my life. Since we changed each other's lives, Quinton corrected. I was just existing before you, Rose. You taught me what it meant to really live." They stood together in the dusty street, remembering and grateful, then walked to the church where they had married. The same church, though the pastor had retired and his son had taken over. They renewed their vows that day, a small private ceremony with just their children present, speaking the same promises they had made 2 decades before, but with the added weight of knowing they had kept those promises faithfully. As they aged, they gradually turned more of the ranch operation over to Thomas, who had married a good woman named Sarah and was raising his own family on the land. Alina had married as well, a lawyer from Billings, but she still managed the ranch's business affairs even while living in town. The family remained close, gathering often for meals and celebrations. Quinton and Rose built a smaller house on the property, closer to the creek, leaving the main house to Thomas and his family. They spent their days in quieter pursuits, tending a large garden, reading, reminiscing, and watching their grandchildren play. They had 5 grandchildren in total, and each one knew the story of how their grandparents met, how Grandpa had bought Grandma's freedom and then stolen her heart. On a clear autumn day, when they were both in their 70s, Rose and Quinton sat on the porch of their small house, wrapped in blankets and watching the sunset paint the sky. Thomas was managing the ranch seamlessly. Their grandchildren were thriving, and the land they had built their life on continued to prosper. "You have any regrets?" Rose asked, a question she had never posed before in all their years together. Quinton thought about it seriously, not wanting to give a superficial answer to such an important question. "I regret things that happened before I met you," he said finally. "Mistakes I made, people I hurt, time I wasted. But from the moment I saw you in Custer, I don't regret a single choice. Every decision I made brought me closer to you, to this life we built." "What about you?" "No regrets," Rose said firmly. "There were hard times, painful times, times before I met you that I wish had been different, but I can't regret them because they led me to you, and our life together. That's been better than anything I could have dreamed of." "We did all right, didn't we?" Quinton said with a smile. "We did more than all right. We built something real and lasting. We raised good children who are raising good children. We made a difference, not just to each other but to everyone around us." Rose leaned against his shoulder the same way she had decades before on a different porch. "I love you, Quinton Oakes. I loved you then, I love you now, and I'll love you forever. And I love you, Rose Oakes. You are, and always will be, the best decision I ever made." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had withstood every test. The air grew cool, and eventually they went inside to the warmth of their home, but not before taking one last look at the land that had witnessed their entire journey together. Years later, when they were both gone, their children and grandchildren would tell the story of Rose and Quinton, of the cowboy who bought a woman's freedom and the woman who thought it was charity until he proposed. They would tell it as a love story, which it was, but also as a testament to the power of choosing kindness, of seeing people as human beings rather than property, of building something lasting on a foundation of respect and mutual devotion. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, and every new owner knew the story of its founders. The small house by the creek where Rose and Quinton had spent their final years was preserved and maintained, a memorial to a love that had been forged in the hardship of the Old West and had proven stronger than chains, stronger than circumstance, stronger even than time. On the mantel of that house, in a place of honor, sat a simple object that visitors often asked about. A small brass key, the universal key that Quinton had used to unlock Rose's chains that first day. It had been kept as a reminder of how their story began, and more importantly, what it represented: freedom, choice, and the beginning of a love that changed everything. Rose and Quinton lived to see their children's children marry and start families of their own. They passed away within months of each other, the way long married couples sometimes do, as if neither could bear to be without the other for long. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery in Custer, under a stone that read simply, "Quinton and Rose Oakes, partners in life, united in love." But their real memorial was not the headstone. It was the ranch that still prospered, the family that still gathered, and the story that was still told, generation after generation, about the cowboy and the woman whose love had begun on an auction block and ended only when their long, full lives reached their natural conclusion. In the end, what had started as an act of compassion had transformed into one of the great love stories of their time. Not because it was dramatic or sensational, but because it was real. Real in its struggles and its triumphs, real in its quiet moments and its grand gestures, real in the way that two damaged people had chosen to heal together rather than apart. The land remembered them. The family remembered them, and the town of Custer, Montana Territory, remembered them. Not as the cowboy who bought a woman's freedom, though that was part of the story, but as two people who had proven that love, real love, was not about ownership or obligation or even rescue. It was about choice. The choice to be kind, to be honest, to be faithful, to build something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. And in choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through good times and hard times, through youth and age, Quinton and Rose had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. They had created a legacy of love that would continue as long as there were people who believed in the possibility of starting over, of finding hope in dark places, of transforming pain into purpose and loneliness into belonging. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the love they built never truly died. It lived on in every couple who chose each other freely, in every act of kindness without expectation of return, in every person who looked at another and saw not what they could take, but what they could give. It lived on in the land they had worked, the children they had raised, and the countless lives they had touched simply by loving each other well. And so, though Quinton and Rose were gone, their story remained, a testament to the enduring power of love freely given and faithfully kept, a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, even in the most unlikely circumstances, love could take root and flourish and transform everything it touched. Their beginning had been marked by chains and auction blocks, but their ending was marked by choice and devotion, and a love that had proven itself through the ultimate test of time. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth believing in, and it remained alive in the hearts of all who heard it, a beacon of hope that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest of endings.